All right, let's get started. But when we were designing this, we wanted a perspective from the investors, from the investing community, and we have, fantastic panel here. As I was, commenting in the main room, I know almost most of them for over 10 years. And let me kickstart by introducing them. So David Gill is the managing director of St. John's Innovation Center, and David comes with decades of experience in the finance world. He was at ET Capital before this. He was a Sloan Fellow in Stanford, and he was also in corporate finance in Chase, some time back. And David is a friend and mentor, and has known me since 2007. And is one of the only few people who still talks to me, even if I didn't deliver on one of his projects. And he niggles me on that. So please welcome David. Joining David is Radha, and Radha is a partner at United Venture. And interestingly, the venture also has an arm in the US, or the US arm is in India. And Radha, again, for Unitas, they have they're technology agnostic, but Radha has had a history with finance and engineering, and I think she did start her career in Texas Instrument, if I'm incorrect, Radha, and then Radha has joined us from Bangalore. Joining Radha, so please welcome Radha, and joining Radha is Manish Miglani. And Manish, I've just come to know him over the last 3 months, and Manish is an investment director in Nesta. And again, he has had, decades of experience in the finance world. He was at Sovereign Capital in Terra Pharma, and he has an engineering degree from Delhi, as well as a management degree from IIM Bangalore, and he's a CFA, Chartered Financial Analyst. Joining him is a very interesting friend of mine. I've already introduced, but for the sake of panel again, is Abel. Abel is a virologist, a startup founder, a serial entrepreneur. But interestingly, he has had he's wearing multiple hats, and currently he's also the investment director of a new fund in Cambridge called CMS, which has a consortium fund including AstraZeneca. And so please welcome Abel, and Abel was in the breakout session, as you know. And joining Abel is Tuhin Bhaumik, again, a very good friend, and for the last 10 years, I've known Tuhin. He is a structural physicist by training from University of Science, and then started a company called Pandorum. And along the journey, they've raised close to $10 million, including from people like Binny Bansal, who started Flipkart, which is an e-commerce platform that got sold to Walmart for $16 billion. But interestingly, Tuhin was also, was one of the key serendipitous events that happened when I was running a business plan competition in India 10 years back, and Tuhin won that competition. And from that, there was a policy change. We went to the government, and then one of the biggest early stage funding program called BIG got started, and that's Tuhin's journey. While he is still running the company for a short period, he was in Heidelberg as an iPod fellow with the European Molecular Biology Laboratory.
Hamburg.
So please welcome Tuhin as well. So we have 55 minutes, but I would give perhaps 2 minutes each to Julie and Abel to just give us, the audience, what was discussed. Just top 3,000 feet overview. Julie, if you can go first, please.
Sure, thanks so much. So we had some really interesting discussion points. I'm just gonna put 4 up right now. I think one of the ones that I found to be very, very true and easy to overlook is having a lot of consistency, particularly when it comes to valuation and forecasting from round to round, that this is really critical. And I think the point that really drew my attention to this was when you're planning to release your stock options for advisors or for ESOP deployment or anything like this, it's really key to keep in mind what your previous round and your future round are evaluated at so that you can be issuing stock accordingly. I think another point that came up, and this is playing a little bit into the investor versus investee tension that we've all been flirting with, is not to get too discouraged by negative feedback from your investors, or if you have different investors that are wanting different things, not to let this take away from your drive and your motivation. And then another point also that Daniel really caught up on, and I was appreciative for his attention to detail on this one, is we had this nice juxtaposition between starting to cultivate relationships with investors early on before you need funding, and so that you have a network to rely on when you are fundraising actively, versus not coming to investors or not courting investors until you have really strong data that will compel them to convert for you. So I think these were some of our big take-home messages. And we did have a few questions that were on our sticky notes, and we didn't get a lot of time to focus on these. So I would like to throw these out for the panel in advance. And one of them was, in fact, how to balance differing wants from your investors as a syndicate. Thoughts on crowdfunding came up. And also a Corona time specific question, how to do demonstrations for investors when face-to-face meetings aren't possible. So really looking forward to this discussion.
Perfect. Thank you, Julie. Abel?
Just kind of, I'm going to kind of follow up on one comment that Julie made about, don't be discouraged. And yes, there was a comment at the end, is you have to be resilient and persistent, because you're going to have a lot of no, and door kind of slamming your head. So you need to kind of keep your head down and move on and keep going. And if you don't have that temperament, better not to, okay? Because they're going to be absorbing a lot of your time and soul, and you have to be resilient, really resilient, and believe in what you're doing. I think, one question was in the topics about when is the right time to start fundraising. You start fundraising from day one, and actually you talk as if you were fundraising from day one, and you're always there to convince people to either join you in your journey as employees or co-founders, but you want also to convince investors to put their money, okay? And you have to be always in this kind of storytelling kind of idea. And the last point is, when you're really going to go fundraising, that takes a lot of time and effort. And you have to be aware of that, that is going to take a lot of your time. And if you're a founder, someone who's involved a lot in the strategy, in the product management, in the operations, that time will be taken away from you to deal with investors and pitch. And you have to be very careful how you manage that, okay? And once you have succeeded to get the money, then it's not finished. You still have to manage your investors and keep communicating with them after they gave you the money. And that takes time as well. So you have to look at what kind of time, breadth you're going to be putting in place to make sure that you do that job that is a job of the CEO, the founder, that's going to be in the company for the long run.
Okay. Okay, great. Abel, thank you. Julie as well, both of you. I think it was such an interesting discussion. Let's dive straight into to hear from others. And again, allow me 30 seconds to just call out a few names. I've never interacted with them, but they could just put on the chat box of what they've been doing. So I see Faith Byrol, I see Jan Book Anderson, and I see Ruth Thalans. I did mention Paulina and others, and I can see Krishna Adhikari and Alex Thompson as well, and Jack and Professor Virdi and Wilson. So please do use the chat box, and Gill and Hazim. So it's a very tight-knit group, so it'll be good to know you. Okay, I think the tension is what we were talking about, and I think we should give it a more constructive feel to it. There's always going to be tension when capital is involved, right? And there have been contrarian views of when you should be pitching, whether you should be it, and all of that. My first 2 minutes to, I think we probably have to extend by 10 more minutes. I seek your indulgence in that because it's already 4:30 BST. Why don't we hear from the investors of what, or from the community of what they have been doing, what is their organization and what is their community first, and then I'll start the Q&A. So to kickstart it, Radha.
Sure, sure. Maybe I will just introduce what we do at Unitas Ventures. I've been with Unitas Ventures for the last 7 years. We are an institutional investor who you call typically impact investors, but impact investors come in different flavors. For us, impact is important, but we are what you call the financial first impact investors. So we look to back entrepreneurs who are building products and services which are in businesses which can scale profitably, can be sustainable and attractive businesses in the long run financially, but also in parallel creating impact to the larger lower income populations in India. So for us, impact is about, from a healthcare standpoint, impact is about providing access to affordable quality healthcare. We have been currently investing, out of our second fund. Our first fund is fully committed. We backed about 23 companies across financial services, healthcare, and what we call education and job tech. And our second fund, which is currently being deployed, we already back about 14 companies in the same 3 areas. We are usually the first institutional investor to come into a company. We write checks between $500,000 to $1 million US dollars. And almost always we are leading these rounds. So typically we like to work very closely with these entrepreneurs as we work with them to build the company to take it to the next level, which is Series A. So that's kind of the broad introduction of what we do at Unitas Ventures.
Thank you, Radha. David, you have seen the Cambridge ecosystem in the UK, over the last so many years. So if you could give your perspective in 2 minutes of St. John's and Cambridge as a tech hub.
Sure. St. John's as an innovation centre has been around since 1987, and I've been running it for 12 years. And I think quite a lot has changed, particularly in the past 20 years. So if you are in a cluster that isn't currently that well developed, it's a case of maybe time together with the commitment of some of the key leaders. What I think we specialise in St. John's is on the one hand being a home to the high potential companies, and on the other at the same time providing the advice, the guidance that enables them to raise funding. We're sector agnostic, but our sweet spot is getting people from, if you like, the top end of angel to Series A. So companies tend to move into this building when they're 3-4 people. They stay here 5 years. They move out when they're 25 people in the team. And that is often beneath the surface quite tumultuous, because you go from being, if you like, a band of equals to having to put in hierarchy and system. And sometimes you have fallout amongst the founders, and you also have to recruit key people. And in a sentence, I suspect one of the key functions that we play as the centre is to act as that bridge between the entrepreneurs and the investor, and to make sure that the entrepreneurs become scale-up companies. So that's really what we do.
Thank you, David. Next in line is Manish. Manish, if you could speak for 2 minutes about Nesta and where you come from.
Thanks, Satya. Hi, I'm Manish from Nesta. Most of you are probably aware of Nesta because of Daniel and his team. But Nesta, in summary, is a charitable foundation that drives change for social causes and improving people's life, largely in a few areas such as healthcare, education, towards equalizing life chances, and increasingly around sustainable economic recovery. We have a particular bias towards the UK because that's where we are based and we understand the market well, but we have a global ambition. We used to be at one time part of the UK government, but now at least for the last 8 years, we've been independent as a foundation. I lead healthcare investments for Nesta, in which previously we had a VC fund we were investing from, with Nesta as one of the GPs, and now we invest directly from Nesta's own endowment into areas that are core to Nesta's charitable purpose and mission. And our stage of investment is very much similar to Radha's, which is pre-Series A and sometimes even Series A, with our check size of up to £1 million in a single round. And we like to follow on in subsequent rounds. Most of the companies that we invest in are post-revenue, but that is not a hard and fast rule.
Okay. Thank you so much, Manish. Abel, if you could come in, of course, you have built Eagle Genomics and you're building other companies, but if you could throw light on the investment firm that you're part of now.
CMS Ventures was started quite recently, actually in December 2019. So going to be soon 1 year. And I joined the fund in April when I exited Eagle Genomics, the company I founded 12 years ago. And CMS Ventures, CMS stands for China Medical Systems, is the venture arm of that company that is a specialty pharma company listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. And that has had a long-term partnership with AstraZeneca that is based here in Cambridge, UK, the headquarters. And CMS Venture Project is a collaboration between CMS, AstraZeneca, and the Judge Business School. AstraZeneca brings their kind of internal expertise to help us review the technologies, and the Judge Business School, with the accelerator and the entrepreneurship center, helps bring some of the mentorship. And I joined as an investment director, so I'm on the other side. I used to be an entrepreneur founder, being the one kind of pitching to get money. Now I'm the one kind of assessing the pitches. I'm trying to bring some empathy from the entrepreneur and the founder. I don't think many investors have had, in my experience. So the four main areas that CMS Ventures want to invest in are what we call the 4Ds: drug, devices, diagnostics, and digital. And the aim is to invest about 25 million over the next 5 years in life sciences in those four sectors, in the UK specifically. And the ticket size goes as small as 50K, and usually in convertible loans, and can go to up to 2 million in equity for more mature companies, either alone or in syndicates.
Okay.
In my side, I'm kind of scouting and listening to a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of pitches, and I'm enjoying it a lot because I see a lot of it's a very lot of positive energy and innovation going out there. So yeah.
So one thing is definitely true, that karma is sometimes good. So you've gone from the other side to this side now. Let's bring in Tuhin now. Tuhin, could you please in 2 minutes tell us about your company?
Hi, it's again great to meet everyone. I'm Tuhin Bhaumik, co-founder and CEO of Pandaram Technologies. Pandaram is a company in the field of tissue engineering and regenerative medicine. And it's a platform technology company. So we have multiple products in different stages of pipeline. One is a bioengineered cornea for corneal blindness. And another one is a drug delivery for regeneration of lung. And so basically it's been a 10 years journey since the company started in 2011. I was a student of PhD in structural biology at that point of time. Then been like first 5 years of proof of concept supported by Government of India grants. In fact, we know Satya from before the during the time of inception of the company, and he has been very early, very positive driving force, because the first grant which supported our journey for the proof of concept from 2011 to 15, the first series of grants we got from the government, and one of them is called Biotechnology Ignition Grant by Department of Biotechnology, a unit called BIRAC. which afterwards was for a great many years led by Satya from the side of the government. So I would say that our story initially could kickstart because of the support from the government. So we started from academia, and from 2016 onwards, we raised around $10 million in the first seed in 2016, and it's been an exponential curve in some sense, because the seed was like $500,000 in 2016. 2018 was about $3.5 million Series A, and now we are in the middle of a pre-Series B. We have raised $6 million, looking for more. So it's been a very interesting journey. And just alluding to one important point, what was being discussed about the tension. I think the two key words about that, the investor-investee tension, are to ease the whole aspect into a constructive environment. Two most important one is empathy, and the second is actually storytelling. And the story is what is a story of problem, product, and what is the value you're bringing.
Perfect. Empathy came onto the table. I think is great. Let me kickstart this. I think, there is Ray. I think Chandy is still around. I don't know whether Colin from Australia is still around. It's maybe early morning. And others have written about their ventures. What is this tension? And, when people use lenses to select, or whether it's called matchmaking or whatever we want to say, what are the top 2 or 3 things that you are seeing when a team comes to you? And does that lens change from the investor community when some titration point along the journey of the company has changed? So, for example, are we viewing a pre-commercial startup differently than a post-commercial one or post-revenue one? So let me kickstart. And I won't ask one question and go around 5 people. That would be very boring. So pardon me, I'll just pick randomly, and then if anybody wants to make a quick comment, just raise your hand. So let me start that with David. You have been on corporate finance. What's your take on that?
I think particularly at the early stage, not necessarily pre-revenue, but really at the early stage, as an investor, and I'm still a director of a venture fund and a director of an alternative finance provider, and a director of a crowdfunding platform. So as an investor, you've got to recognize that in a sense, all entrepreneurs are delusional, or they wouldn't be doing what they're doing, because your chances of success are statistically so small. So at the same time, you want to find the people who are sufficiently delusional to take on a mission impossible, but who are also realistic enough to be able to chunk that mission down into sizes, little individual pieces that you can solve piece by piece. And what goes along with that is, if I were looking for one thing in the CEO founder, it's being cool under fire, because nothing ever goes to plan. A mutual friend of ours, Satya, Stu McTavish, who runs IdeaSpace here in Cambridge, has a saying that an hour in the life of a startup founder is the equivalent of a week's work for somebody who works in an established company. And therefore, one of those characteristics you need in the people you're investing in is that ability to be able to turn quickly, to keep solving problems and keep upbeat. But I still think there's that tension between the delusion and the realism, because at some stage, a lot of companies are going through great difficulty. And as a non-exec director, as an investor, quite often your task is to find the least painful way of letting some of the original founders go. And because that's in the long-term interest of the business, but the founders won't necessarily see it as being in their long-term interests, I think that is where one of the fundamental tensions does come from.
Okay, thank you. This is very interesting in terms of using relativism here about time. 1 week in startup and 1 week in corporate in a big established company, and I think that's true. That's probably true of many other big organizations as well in the nonprofit world. Radha, how about you? from the Indian side of things, and then I've come to Manish. So big points from you.
Sure. I think the word entrepreneurial was coined because it kind of connotates like a bunch of qualities, right? I mean, you can't point it to passion. You can't point it only to delusion. You can't point it to product. You can't point it to one specific thing. I think it's a very complicated set of qualities that kind of goes into making an entrepreneur. What I've seen in the Indian context specifically is, I'm going to kind of take a step back and talk about the team and not just one individual. The founding team, I think one of the key things I have seen in India, and Satya, you're familiar with this, is that most of the teams that are building for healthcare in India are very heavy on product and technology, and very close to the I guess the platform that they are trying to build to solve the problem. The key thing that is missing is the ability to commercialize whatever it is that they are building. So I think what ends up happening is they get very close to the science or the engineering of what they are bringing, but they really take a long time to actually figure out how they will take this to market. And unless, I mean, you may be building the most most elegant product, you might be building the most sophisticated science, but if you really are not solving a problem and are not able to commercialize, find customers who can pay for it, then it is not interesting to an investor, because it's not a business. I think fundamentally that is one issue that I have seen time and again in most of the teams that I have met, especially on the healthcare side. That's what I would maybe say. And for us, the stage at which we come in, like Manish or I think even Abel mentioned, it's not that the companies should have revenues, but then they should have a proof of demand. They should have a handful of customers who are willing to say that, yes, this is something that I will pay for. There's some kind of a pilot or whatever that's going on, but there definitely has to be a proof of that demand. So that's where we've seen a lot of these startups falter.
Right. So, Manish, do you get taken by the idea or by the the idea of scale? And you mentioned impact, and you also mentioned, I think somebody mentioned empathy. So, are you using the same lens as Radha said about team, or David said about ability to work in multiple dimensions? What's your lens?
I would say all of the above. So that's the easy answer. But I'll highlight that more than the idea, the team is important because of the stage we invest in. Ideas, in my experience, and almost with 100% strike rate, what we've invested in, whether it's the idea or the initial product, it almost always has changed. And a company's look very different 3 years after investment than what we evaluated on. It depends on the team, and the teams, especially led by the founders, because these are small teams at the time we invest in. If they're able to navigate, there will be hurdles. We rate and judge founders and core team based on, do we think they'll be able to navigate it? Will they be mature enough? And these are very difficult to evaluate. It's not a straight black and white answer. And at some point it fits in with the overall understanding of the market. And it also, truth be told, it depends on what else an investor has as an alternative investment. And sometimes that drives, where does one see different founders and different ideas and products comparatively rather than in isolation.
Very well pointed. I think, this kind of, there is no hard and fast rules about topics. So, this about lens to use, team, ability to multi-function, and I think ability to give space for the team to expand, and, whether it's companies that are here with us, that where I remember Tuhin was at one time 3 people and now maybe 30 people, right? Let me bring in Abel and David into that tension question, and then again I will bring in Tuhin and Radha and Manish. So this tension, and I think David, you mentioned the tension is because you start as band of equals, And as Radha and Manish and others mentioned, that band of equals starts maybe disaggregating a little bit, and of course, if your board members, if you have diluted yourself, so the board members now, so the whole dynamism changes. So what is this, how do you make this relationship grow in a constructive way, right? I mean, we have seen cases where this relationship has broken apart. And I think the sadness of that is that we have products that were amazing, could have reached the market, but they didn't because the team broke apart, right? So could you reflect on this? And then I'll bring Abel into this, having seen and having built companies, what's his take? So David.
I'm not sure there's a universal answer, but something that does seem to work quite well is where, to come back to the phrase that we used earlier, the empathy between the lead investor and the founders is strong enough that the investor is probably acting in a non-exec capacity and also acting as a mentor to, let's say, the CEO for simplicity. And over time, I think the investor needs to help the founder CEO come to a realistic assessment of whether his or her abilities are such that they can move on to the next stage, move on from the 5 people to the 50 people. And sometimes it happens. I've seen several examples in this building this year. I mean, there's one company that started just over 5 years ago that's just been sold to Broadcom for tens of millions. And they grew to be some 40, 50 people, all with the original team. And then I think at that stage they said, that's it, we've had the offer we couldn't possibly refuse. And we've got there with the grace and humility of the mentors who helped us, even though we didn't need a formal venture investment. There's another company I've been working with very intensively where particularly the lead founder didn't have that humility and had to leave acrimoniously. And because that was just before the pandemic struck, it's meant that trying to raise money in the past 7 months has been particularly difficult. And since he's still the largest single shareholder, in the long run, he won't benefit either. So I think that the big role for the investors is to act as mentor and get the founders to understand both their strengths and their limitations. Some will be able to make that transition, others won't.
Okay, thank you. So, investors as mentors, and how do you calm the frayed nerves within the team? Abel and Tuhin, quick comments. Abel?
Yeah, I mean, when you get investment in your company, apart from the money and the shareholding agreement you sign, and you're entering into a human relationship, okay? And that's so important. The empathy, the trust, the fact that people, the investor on the board or the founder can honestly kind of have honest discussions and put problems forward without having a feeling that being personally attacked is super important. As an investor, looking at, obviously the value proposition, the technology, the market is super important. But if you have a founding team that is not coachable, that is not listening, that is not humble, we talk about humility, that is not self-aware of their weaknesses, we'd rather not invest. Again, they can have an A technology, but they will be seen as a C team. And a C team, you cannot push A technology on the market. The opposite is true, though. You can have a C technology with an A team that makes it. So the team is so important because at the end of the day, it's human beings who make things happen. Technology doesn't sell on its own. A product doesn't sell on its own. You still need the people around that. So yeah, human relationships. So pick carefully, not just the money from the investors, but the people who are giving you the money, and see if you're going to be able to stand the relationship in the long run.
Wonderful. Tuhin. You are muted.
I think the key word over here will be alignment, the right alignment between the investors and founders, both the community. And then again, taking the word from what Abel was telling is relationship. So communication is very important because, as the equation goes, it's like reality minus expectation is happiness. So you have to set you have to make sure the expectations are right. And expectation towards an investor comes from, like, for me, it'll be what's my promise to the investors, right? As a founder, and that's what are the milestones in time. So it's very important to have a continuous, I think, communication process that really helps to ease any of these gaps in understanding. And if you have got, like, one important aspect as when you're going to raise fund, to choose the correct investor is also to understand your current milestone and the stage of the investor. Like, for us as a therapeutic development company, in vitro work or preclinical work, and then you have clinical phase 1, 2. So as we are moving through these different parts, it's also early stage investors who will write a check up till 1 million. The seed round, there are multiple timelines which are comparability. So as you go up, like when you are almost certainly around that series B raise when you're moving to phase 2. So there are certain things, like, it's, of course, for every company it varies, but you have to choose because it helps to set the right expectation.
Right. I mean, that leads to the reverse due diligence. And, I will first ask the investors whether they have been reverse due, whether they have been, whether they have gone through a process of diligence and whether they advise their portfolio companies to do diligence on, incoming investors. How do you do that? Manish?
I think that's a easy one to a certain extent, but beyond that, it doesn't work. What we, for instance, recommend to new companies is talk to our existing portfolio, speak to them what are the pros and cons. No investor is perfect. And to be honest, they will receive from some of our portfolio companies not a very good opinion about us, because there are always tensions, stresses. And I'll be honest, those tensions and stresses are more when the company or the product is not doing well. But we encourage people to talk to all of them, because that's the only and at least the best way they can form an opinion, a composite opinion about us as an investor. And what we also recommend is to do the same for other investors. However, I'll just add one more thing. It's not easy, because many times there's that supply and demand, and how much choice does one have? That is the practical consideration behind founders doing reverse due diligence. So,
right, Radha.
No, I think Manish covered it well. And the last point he mentioned is the key, right? So if you are in a position to be able to choose from a set of investors, then yes, I mean, it makes sense for you to say, I want to be picky and, this is the right investor for me, etc. But several times, I think, unfortunately, entrepreneurs are not necessarily in that situation. But given that, I think there are two things I would really suggest, and I've done this for all our portfolio companies who've raised the next rounds of capital, or even newer companies who we end up investing in, right? The first thing is the no-brainer, which is, we definitely connect them with a few of our portfolio CEOs and have asked them to have a conversation to understand how we work with these companies. Because as the earliest investor in the company, we really work very closely with the teams. I mean, it's likely that I might be speaking to the portfolio CEO whose board I'm sitting on more often than sometimes maybe people in my family. It's possible. So, so I think it's very important, like Abel said, that it's a relationship that is built on what I call intellectual honesty. So you should be capable of coming and sharing the bad news as easily as you can come and share good news. And you should be willing to listen and say and agree to disagree. At the same time, you should be willing to listen and implement. So I think it's a very hard one, but that's the most critical thing. So I definitely have them speak to our portfolio CEOs. And the second thing is, I think across the globe, investor networks are very small. Literally, I think I would say that all VCs usually know other VCs who are investing in the same space. So one of the things that we always suggest to portfolio CEOs is pick an investor who understands the sector well, because if you really if you end up with an investor where they don't really understand understand the sector well, the alignment is going to be a huge issue. Their expectations around your ability to grow, exit, all of that will not be in sync with what you're really able to demonstrate, and that will lead to a lot of tension. So I think these are two things that definitely we end up coaching our CEOs on.
Right. Thanks. What if we step back and think about what has been discussed? It is the team dynamics, and many of the startups that we have now and we have interacted go through this transition phase. And I think as all of you, David and Radha and Manish, you've indicated, that transition is very important and fraught with fractures. And I think as Abel and Tuhin mentioned, and those are human relationships that needs to be tackled. Tuhin, because you just raised close to $5-6 million dollars, how has that in 30 seconds? What's your take on the reverse due diligence?
You're not always given the choice, but every money comes with a cost, and be very careful about the cost. So reverse due diligence is important. Building expectation, clear communications, these are key.
Okay, Abel, you want to say something about that?
I think for me, reverse due diligence is a must. I mean, I would expect an investee company not asking me questions about CMS Ventures, who we are, what we do, what are our expectations, to basically be taking money blindly, and that wouldn't be a good sign. And there's no shame or unpoliteness about asking about the fund and the people and what is their aim, what they want to achieve, and what is their ethos and values. I mean, yeah, definitely. And if basically an investor is offended, maybe it's not the right investor. That would be my take, because you're starting on the, why I cannot ask any questions? What's happening here?
Correct.
Right? So,
a good point. I think, sometimes when people ask me, I say, and most of the co-founders that we deal in our world are, science and tech PhDs or masters or at least have a science degree. And I always say, think about your lab. If you want to go and do a grad study, you always do a check on your PhD supervisor, right? By asking, the best person to ask is the person who has already submitted his or her thesis, because she or he will give an honest comment about the PI. So, okay, let's move on. I think, I'll just ask two more questions and then I'll bring in the audience. And this is the question about, and I think it needs to be asked because this got discussed. COVID is here. It's impacting all of us. And you are building a product, to maybe related to COVID diagnostics or medtech, or, it doesn't matter. How do you, so there are two questions here. One, and the first one goes to, Radha, Manish, and David. How has the tech hub's investing mentality or the DNA, has it changed because of COVID? What do you think about is going to happen to audience like here when they go to raise fund? Is it going to impact? And if so, what they should be doing? Radha, what's the take from Bangalore?
So the investing ecosystem hasn't necessarily slowed down in many ways. I mean, I think there's enough capital out there for the right kind of startups. But what I think I want to emphasize is, there are certain types of startups where this capital is actually kind of flowing towards. And if I go back to the 4 Ds that I think Abel mentioned, most of this capital is really going towards startups that are digital, right? You're actually talking about startups who are solving problems, maybe leveraging data, which is more AI, ML kind of startups, or if you're actually doing tele something, right? So you're doing teleradiology, any telehealth kind of startups. And I think any tele-diagnosis and those kind of platforms, I think the capital towards devices, has kind of in many ways taken a pause, because the moment there is a hardware element, there is a lot of other challenges that come with actually taking that device or device plus software to the market. And you know, given the current situation, there's a little bit of that question coming up. And we don't do that much around drugs, so I'm not really that familiar. But I think there is definitely enough capital, like I said, which is going towards startups which are in the you know, data slash digital space.
Okay, so digital. How is Cambridge responding, David?
I think it's interesting because it's been phased. In the first, let's say, 2 months after lockdown, getting new investment was very difficult. And most investors were looking after their existing portfolio. They were making sure that costs were controlled. It was almost a sort of negative protective phase. I'd say in the past 3 months, we've actually seen investors be prepared to do new investment, which somewhat surprised me because of the extent to which in both investment and entrepreneurship are contact sports, and people want to meet each other and have that long, slow get to know you, whereas there has actually been now the transfer to doing most of it online. Interestingly, from what data I've been able to get around here, there seem to have been somewhat fewer but somewhat bigger deals. So you're still talking in that angel Series A space. The investment is carried on probably at the same sort of levels in absolute terms, but with the size becoming slightly bigger. And our experience in recent months was, if your product was something that was solving a COVID-related problem, you got fast-tracked. So you would go up the agenda very quickly. Now, I think there's going to be another pause because a lot of the really early stage investors are going to need some exits to replenish tanks. But the past 6-7 months have not been nearly as bad as I'd feared when we went into lockdown.
Okay, and Manish, what's your view from London?
I've got a similar view. When we saw lockdown, the way we approached it, we put it in 3 buckets. From the startup's perspective and their end customer or their paying customers' perspective. Does the lockdown improve their priority for the customer? With some of our health investments, it did, and in education. Is it something that it might have a short-term blip because people are just waiting and watching, but it is not a core risk factor because of lockdown? And thirdly, this is probably a nice to have thing for that customer, and no one is going to be focusing on this type of a product, at least until they get through COVID and the repercussions. There were a few investments that we saw in the third bucket. We paused on it. We thought we'll take a deeper look at the second bucket just to make sure that we are not being hasty. And subsequently, running past 6 months, we've actually made an investment, what we considered second bucket as of earlier this month, which is a company which is device plus backed with AI and data analysis in the medtech space. And then the first bucket, we were lucky enough when the lockdown started, we had 3 investments near the finishing line, which we thought these are first bucket, they will actually benefit from the lockdown. One of them was a digital health company, telehealth company, and within 2 weeks of our investment, they got an NHS contract for rolling out telemedicine. So that was nice in a particular way, but we would have invested irrespective.
Okay. Abel, you're a new fund, and this is my last question before I open it up. How is this going to, create? Do you think this turbulence is going to create more turbulence in patient capital? All of you take 5 to 7 years to reach the market, and I might bring in Chandi here as well and Ray. In the COVID times, will it be a rare species to look for? Is it going to be a needle in the haystack in terms of finding that patient capital?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but I mean, in terms of CMS Ventures, we're a patient investor. So we don't have this 7-year timeline where we have to do the return on investment to the original LPs. We are there for the long run. In terms of deal flow, is that where you're talking about? We've managed to source a lot, and actually even easier, frankly. I think, there is some angel groups, for example, that relied a lot on events, face-to-face meetings that are a bit froze at the moment in terms of their investment, because they need still this human relation meeting in the flesh. We start in December, we are the Zoom generation. It didn't kind of, it was even easier, being kind of using LinkedIn, Bohurst or databases to reach out to people, and then we contact them, get Zoom links, and the whole thing has been streamlined fairly easily. So we haven't had any issues in deal flow kind of at the moment. So I didn't know before that. So I got into investment only a few months back. Okay. But I don't think it's been an impairment, frankly, if you embrace the digital world. Then,
Right.
Satya, we're going to have to stop in 5 minutes. So maybe you want to.
Yeah, we'll stop. We'll stop in 5 minutes. Let's bring in, I don't see any question and answers from the audience, except for a couple of comments.
Jan had asked a question, and I think it would be quite interesting to let him say it orally, because it seemed a bit controversial. Go ahead, Jan.
Go ahead, Jan.
Yeah, I've at quite a few occasions, actually, we've seen very strong statements from investors I had on board that they were going to be very active on the board. They would appoint people I could work with. They would be providing advice and stuff. But I've very often found that it's not really the case, because everybody are occupied in their own worlds, and sometimes that is. Despite being requested and asked for, it's really hard to get on board. And I think it's probably because the world of the investor is very, very different. Probably Abel is one of the few that has come into the dark side. And but
okay, I think that bridging is important, Jan, and that's a nice comment.
It's also very different.
Yeah, that begs a quick question. Tuhin, you have tried to raise, you raise funds in India, now you're in the US. Do you see a cultural difference between, I mean, this is a bit controversial question, but between the investing community, and you've been in Europe for 4 years, are there any differences that you might want to highlight, or you think that they use the same lens? And David, I might bring you in for final comments. Tuhin, you are muted.
That's an interesting point you raised, Satya. There are differences. Like I have given several pitches in India, Europe, and US. And what happens is, one clear aspect is the ecosystem or the investors from these different geographies come with different levels of risk appetite. So what I have, and I really do not want to offend anyone over here, so please don't take it any other way. It's just my personal experience, what I've seen, that in both in India and in Europe, people are more, I won't say risk averse, but more risk calculative. And what I've seen is in the US, the investors are more comfortable with risk in certain sense. And there is no good or bad about it, again, to begin with. What I mean by that is how it can affect your pitches. I have sometimes given the same pitch in Europe, and it was asked that the product which you are developing, which is going into clinical trial, is there any similar product already in the market? And my answer to that is no, there are other products in development in similar stage. So this same answer, this same question in Europe often has been taken in a way that, okay, then why don't we wait for a little more and then let it go through the phase 1 trial, a bit more de-risking, and then we come in, because it still sounds risky, and which is absolutely true. But in the US, the same question, the same answers, and the investors, the next question I've seen multiple times, which means that if you do a successful phase 1, will you be the first product in the market? Like, are you going to be the first one to come into the field? So you have to be able to balance these aspects of your pitch when you're going in different geography. And about the pitch itself, I've seen there is like deductive and inductive reasoning. So in the sense, in many times, although in the first few moments you clear the problem statement, how you are solving it, that is anyways constant wherever you are talking. Within the first few moments, few minutes, you have to make it clear. But going forward, in case of deductive logic, and I've seen this more working more in Europe, that you build your technology through elements and why it works coming together. Where in the US, you emphasize more on what kind of like we have a great chief medical advisor who has been in 17 FDA trial. So there is this aspect of geographic tuning which you have to do. Yeah.
Okay, great. David and Radha.
I think I'd agree with that. And I think on the positive side, things that are changing in the UK and Europe in the past 15 years or so is there's been a shift that the people who actually run the funds are more and more themselves successful entrepreneurs who've moved to the dark side. Whereas I think when I started in this industry 25 years ago, almost all the people in investment were recycled bankers and accountants. So we're not at the same level of risk tolerance as the US, but a part of that I think is also related to fund size. That most of the US funds, particularly in the West Coast, are so big that they have to place enormous bets and they have to rely on becoming, in effect, a category killer. And very specifically, in terms of that empathy that Jan brought up in his question, where it succeeds best in my experience is where the investor is somebody who has been a successful entrepreneur and can work both sides of the street. Where it's somebody who's thinking only of the bottom line, it doesn't work. And I think lastly, maybe one of the small upsides of the whole COVID pandemic is, thank God, both investors and investees have stopped talking about unicorns and they're talking about solving problems again.
Okay, great point. Radha and Manish, quick points to that tension or to that cultural difference, if there is any.
No, so I definitely think that the Indian ecosystem, investor ecosystem, is not as risk-friendly as maybe the ones in the US. And to some extent, I would maybe attribute that the fact that the understanding of the domain is not as much in the Indian investor ecosystem. I don't think, so the number of, healthcare-focused funds in India are very few. I can actually count them on my fingers. So there's, so what happens is that since the understanding of the sector is, or the domain is not very strong, and the sector in general is very, very hard to crack in India, given, the many players that you're selling to. I think that kind of says that if I have $1, would I be better off investing it in a consumer internet company, or would I want to invest it in a health tech company with so many challenges, right? I think at the end of the day, that's really what investing is about, being able to generate returns and create impact in some way. That's the issue. But it will change. I think it's going to take some time for it to change. Funds are slowly kind of popping up, across the spectrum, across the continuum, and hopefully that will change things here.
Thanks, Radha. Manish, and I'll probably bring in Chandy and Ray and Abel for last comments as well.
I'll just do a very quick comment. I agree with everything that's said, but I'll just add one slight, probably unfashionable thing you'll not hear too many VCs say. When VCs say, get an investor who can value add to the board, that's perfect. In fact, I would go one step forward and say, get a few co-investors who can add different things to the board, not exactly the same thing. But sometimes also get an investor who has deep pockets, may not add value beyond actually getting your next round visibility. And that's also a value add in itself. So if you're spoiled for choice, get everyone.
Okay, Ray, you're sitting right in the world that we are talking about, the differences between Europe and Bay Area and India. So what's your take? And then I'll bring in Chandy.
Well, most of my fundraising has been here. As you say, there's every restaurant, every cocktail party I go to has VCs to shake hands with. So plenty of opportunity, but it's right that in the past it's been very much focused on not diagnostics, not infectious disease, but the social networking, artificial intelligence, and whatever's hot that particular year. I think that's changing. And COVID has certainly raised the visibility of infectious disease, and maybe, as David said, that the valuations that go with it are now more attractive, and I hope that helps all of us around the table here to make things happen that every founder here wants to make happen, and that the world needs, and all the investors that are interested for a reason to make an impact on the world. So
great point.
It's a good time. Yeah.
Good point. Chandy, how about, what's your take? You raised $20 million from India. What's your take on what, and you've been quietly listening, so.
Yeah, I think as long as investors, yes, I agree that India is a slightly difficult market because primarily we've not had so much success in taking products to the market. As that changes, I think India will change too as far as investments go. But that could happen as long as investors realize that they have set out on or not investors, rather entrepreneurs realize they have set out on a goal to solve a problem. That problem was to make a difference primarily. And they have the humility to understand that, and they have the ability to let go at the right time. In some way, it's like parenting. So unless you kind of look at it that way, products won't go to market. And I think that is the primary solution to the chicken and egg solution about India being a little more risk-taking in terms of investments.
Perfect. Thank you. A big round of applause to all panelists and all speakers. Thank you very much